As sentence for count 1, the court commits you to the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections for a period of 270 months. That's 270.
We continue to follow breaking news first at 4. Former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin has been sentenced to 22.5 years for the murder of George Floyd. Floyd's dying gasp under Chauvin's knee last year led to the biggest outcry against racial injustice in the U.S. in generations. Thank you for joining us. I'm Sally Schulze.
And I'm Natalie Baumke in for Anthony Ponce. Today's sentencing hearing included emotional impact statements from both the Floyd family and Chauvin himself. Let's listen.
I wanted to know from the man himself why. Our family is forever broken. And one thing we cannot get back is George Floyd.
I do want to give my condolences to the Floyd family. There's going to be some other information in the future that would be of interest, and I hope things will give you some peace of mind.
Of an intentional second-degree murder while committing...
Chauvin is still awaiting trial on federal civil rights charges in Floyd's death.
Let's talk about the sentencing that happened today. Fox 32 legal analyst and former Fox 32 anchor and reporter Larry Yellen joins us. Thanks for being with us, Larry.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So prosecutors, they pushed for 30 years for this sentence. The judge said 22.5. What's your reaction?
Well, I was a little surprised, not at the sentence itself, but I was surprised that the defense attorneys and the defendant himself, Chauvin, did not show any contrition or assumption of responsibility for what happened on the day of the murder. I think that could have possibly reduced the sentence. A lot of defendants do that in these situations. They don't say that they don't admit to the crime, but they do more than just convey their condolences to the family. If you go back to the Jason Van Dyke case, when he was sentenced, before his sentencing, he said that the day that Laquan McDonald was shot was the worst day in his life. It was the first time he had ever used his weapon on duty. He was proud of that fact. He said he prayed for the soul of Laquan McDonald, and the last thing he wanted to do was shoot Laquan McDonald. There were no words like that today from Derek Chauvin, and I think that's why we got the 22.5-year sentence. Prosecutors seem happy with it, even though they wanted 30, and the maximum overall was 40.
Larry, Judge Cahill issued a 22-page outline of ultimately why he decided on this sentence. You had an opportunity to look through that. What did you find?
Right. In open court, he said that he didn't want to get into the details, but he did want everyone to know that his decision would not be based on public opinion. And that was in reference to all of the protests that have occurred around the country over the last year or so. But in his written opinion, this is what he had to say. He said that Chauvin treated Mr. Floyd without the respect and denied him the dignity owed to all human beings, in which he certainly would have extended to a friend or a neighbor. And that's why he gave him not the 15 years, which was the maximum under the guidelines, or the 12.5 that most second-degree murder cases result in, but he gave him 22.5. He'll serve about 2/3 of that. He'll serve about 15 years.
So we did hear just briefly from Chauvin himself for the first time in more than a year about this. As you mentioned, he didn't show contrition. He didn't say a lot. He hinted that more information might come out in the future, but he said he couldn't really talk because of another case. That's the federal civil rights case. Tell us where we stand with that and how that plays into this.
Well, as often happens in these cases, there are federal civil rights charges saying that Chauvin denied George Floyd the basic civil rights that are guaranteed under the Constitution with an illegal assault and excessive force. And if he is convicted, if he goes to trial in federal court, and it's possible that case will continue, if he's convicted there and gets a sentence, it won't add to the current sentence. Rather, it would run concurrently with his state charges. So even if he got 10 or 12 years for denial of civil rights, it wouldn't extend this 22.5 years, which he received today.
Right now, Derek Chauvin is serving time in Minneapolis. Larry, where do you expect him to serve out the rest of this time? Will he stay where he currently is?
Well, he's been in isolation for his own protection. He's been in a cell where he eats in his cell, he sleeps in his cell, and he's out released for 1 hour a day into the larger section where he can get a little bit of exercise. I would imagine that he'll be transferred to another state institution somewhere in Minnesota, a state prison. and that he won't receive any special privileges because he's a former police officer. He'll be treated like all of the other inmates, but possibly given some additional protection if he fears for his own life because of other inmates in those prisons. Police officers often face that problem.
All right, Larry Yellen, we appreciate your insight.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, and we're going to go live to Minneapolis a little bit later in the show to talk more about this sentencing.